Okay.
Okay, perfect timing. We're live for another Tech Talk.
Yeah, and today we're talking about the gradebook, but specifically communication through the gradebook. So I figured this would be a good time to kind of talk through a lot of the things that I get a lot of questions about, especially from new faculty, because some of this might seem a little esoteric if you haven't been in Canvas before. What are the colors? What are the symbols? And then we'll kind of get into more of those advanced tools that I find really helpful for improving your practice and making your life easier. That's always the goal.
And we should say this is the first of a three-part series of Tech Talks on the gradebook. So more gradebook to come after today.
We're gonna beat you over the head with it, but lovingly. So with that, starting that loving process, I'm just gonna kind of get us all up to speed on what we see when we're in the gradebook. So there should be some things that kind of jump out at us that the gradebook communicates that we should all pretty much know. One being anytime there's a number value in there, it does mean that you have graded it or Canvas has graded it automatically. Sometimes new faculty might get a little bit used or not used to that when they jump in. When you see one of these icons, that's the little essentially piece of paper with the very small exclamation symbol indicating there is an assignment that needs to be graded.
Is that what that is? Wow, I've never looked at it on a screen big enough to realize what that icon even is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Your glasses check here.
Yeah.
But outside of these kind of standard symbols, you put a number in, it's graded, you've got this symbol for things need to be graded, there's a submission from a student popping back at you. There's some other elements that both communicate to the students what's happening with assignment as well as to you what you need to do with an assignment. So I figured we go through those. So mainly we're going to talk about this color coding that you see behind a lot of these assignments in here. One of the biggest ones that we see is the missing, that's that red. And obviously, if you've changed your gradebook up, there's actually options to adjust that, which we might talk about later. But mainly is if a due date has passed, Canvas will automatically put in a missing tag to that, which for a student will also show up on their gradebook, and we'll take a look at that.
And that's based on the due date on the assignment. If there is no due date on the assignment, it never turns red.
Exactly, exactly. So then, moving from there, if somebody does turn in something late, that's what the blue tag is. And again, if you jump into, let's up just a little bit. If you jump into the flyout for this specific assignment for this specific student, you will see that status associated with it, right? So for example, with the missing, if I jump into the flyout, again, there's that little kind of, when you select into a cell, it'll give you that option. There we can see that the status is missing if you ever get confused, but there are some statuses that don't show up in here that are dictated by things outside of the gradebook. For example, this kind of peach orange that shows up when you have a rule in an assignment group to drop a grade if it meets a certain criteria. I've had a couple of questions from faculty before because they didn't realize there was a visual for that in the gradebook. When it comes to the students end, and it just slightly grays it out. So that part of the process isn't very transparent for them. So that's always something that you may want to kind of consider when you're talking to your students about basically your course policies and your syllabus. So for example, if I jump in here, you'll notice it doesn't have a status, but up here it's been tagged as dropped.
And that's if you're using assignment groups and you have a rule on the group saying drop the X number of lowest grades on that assignment.
Exactly.
Assignment group.
Or the X number of highest grades in the group, which is bizarre, but you can drop the highest scores as well.
Like you are a monster, yes.
Cannot conceive of why you would ever use that setting.
I bet there's some interesting alternative grading practice that makes sense in, but if you got that, you should let us know. Boggles the mind. And then outside of those, I guess I skipped over excuse. That's another one of these statuses, but it'll remove it from the gradebook for that student.
And with it, and when it does that, it actually lowers their total number of points in the gradebook, right? So if you have 100 points in your gradebook and you excuse a 5-point assignment, then now that student's grade is being calculated out of 95 points instead of 100, if I remember correctly.
Let's see here, let me.
Tom is giving a thumbs up on me.
Okay, perfect.
That is correct. Yeah.
I wasn't sure of. Perfect.
You'll be able to see it in the total column if you hover over the percentage. You should be able to see how many points it's out of. Yeah.
And then if we're not excusing it, no status, pop it out. Oh, no, let's give it a 0. there's the 23 out of 30.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Let's go back to excused. Sorry, sketch. Note that all of the things I just did would probably communicate something to the student, right? There's a notification anytime a grade is changed. That can be very confusing for the student on their end. So there are some things that we can do to kind of control when grades are posted, when we communicate that kind of stuff. So not only do we have these elements that are communicated to students, but then we have another layer of when notifications that Canvas is set to send out, assuming that the students have notification preferences set the way they want. This could have been a kind of cluster of emails, just depending. So with that, there are some options that you can do to kind of hide those notifications, hide the grades until you're ready for essentially them to be notified. And that can be done both at the assignment level, but also at the full gradebook level. So if you're doing this all beforehand, say you want grades to be posted before class starts, you know, maybe that's, you know, the due date's the night before, you don't post grades until class starts. There's some kind of interaction you're trying to hope for there. Well, before you start grading things, you can go to grade posting policy. You can manually or set the gradebook to manually post grades. Now this will be for every assignment in the course, and it will change a couple of things about how notifications are sent. One, they won't get notifications when there is a grade for the assignment, when grades are changed, when there's submission comments, they won't be able to see their submission comments. Everything's basically locked down. If you do that, well, for example, for some of these, they have grades set, but here, for example, students wouldn't see even that they have, you know, submissions, any of that, or it would see their submissions, but they would not see any notifications if I, for example, screwed up as I was grading. Maybe I started grading Sketch and I got all the way through my list and then I realized I misapplied my rubric. I come back, I change it to 7. None of that would be notifying the student. Then when I'm ready, I can go and accept. In this case, because I already had grades, it doesn't do that. What you'll notice is when you set grade policies, especially blanket ones, if there are grades that have been posted, you've already gone through and kind of manually adjusted things, graded students, it won't override that. So those grades will stay posted. Now, if you are in a situation where you're kind of doing this one-off, you can set a grade posting policy for an individual assignment, which has the same functionality, but doesn't do the whole blanket approach, which can be messy. As you just saw, I did that approach, but I already had grades in places, so the whole who sees what gets really confusing. So unless you start with that.
So maybe you have like a bunch of regular weekly assignments, and you're fine with grades being posted as you do grading, but maybe for your midterm, you don't want students to see that until everybody's been graded all at once. So you don't have students comparing notes or whatever, something like that for a big assignment.
Or even, like I said earlier, you're working through the grade and as you're working through it, you're realizing that a question was written wrong and you need to adjust the grades or something like that.
Okay.
Thomas, how you unmuted?
Yeah, you can make this change one-off in SpeedGrader. So when you're in SpeedGrader, you can basically mute the assignment is what you used to do. But like you can adjust the posting policy here under the settings gear, I believe. Am I wrong? No, I guess you can't do it here anymore.
It's the eyeball.
It's the eyeball. Cool, thank you. I was just like, where is it? I thought you could do this. Yeah, so you can mute it here as you're starting to work, right? And then it allows you to kind of norm your grades as you work through. And it keeps those communications going out from the grade book as you're working, rather than like muting the entire course. Like it depends on how you want to do it. There's also a weird thing with peer reviews too. Like if you do student peer reviews and then you start grading the assignment, when you suppress the grade comments, students can't actually see the feedback from other students that in the peer review. It's a little weird.
Peer review is its own topic that we might do a tech talk on all on its own sometime.
It's behaving differently now with the assignment enhancements too, which is frustrating. But yeah.
on the short list. All right,
fun
anyway.
things. But with that, as Tom was saying, you've got that hide grade option speed grader. You can also do it in here, and this is kind of like my after the fact. I kind of screwed up. The grade posting policy, I think, is something you want to do before you get to the point where there are submissions, because again, like it's really messy, and it can be a whole vibe, especially since, for example, we've got this other category, which you might have noticed, this little green thing, which shows up when a student submits another assignment. Now, you can do that either by student submits and you go through the resubmission process like I did on this left one. Over on this right one, the student just resubmitted a new version. So they're essentially non-distinguishable in the gradebook, which I guess pathway they've taken to resubmission, whether they just did it on their own or you basically assigned a resubmission. Exactly. So when that happens, like this student already had a grade on their previous assignment. When I set the manual grading policy, it didn't change anything for them. They already had assignment graded. But by hiding it, I can, no grades to hide. Let's do this one. By hiding it, I can do that after the fact. And even with students that have grades, that will also be hidden from their view. So if I do all of this kind of crazy stuff, and actually let me clean this up because I already have this set at the course level. I'm going to remove that. I'm going to try to keep things nice and clean. And you'll notice that the hide grading post policy different, but effectively the same function on the student end. So let's go take a look at what this all looks like for Sketch, because I don't know how many people have actually seen the view for students, their version of the gradebook, but it can be a helpful thing to realize what information actually shows up in there. So for example, here's Sketch's grades. Here's that excluded excluded assignment. Shows up as an EX, which isn't exactly the most clear to a student if they don't understand. Oh gosh, of course I clicked it. What if scoring? But it's not the clearest thing to a student what's going on here. EX might have to explain that to a student or say, hey, I exclude certain things, or I'm going to exclude this from your grade. You'll see it in the grade book as such. Just know it just means it's not going to count against you or towards your grade. Then, for example, stuff that is hidden will have the little I through it. Stuff that's in the grading process should be fairly familiar. We've got, for example, an assignment with a file submission shows the little paper icon. Quiz shows the little quiz icon. If it's a text box, you'll see a T. But again, those kind of icons might not always be the most clear to a student what it means. It just means it's in the grading process, and that's the file that was submitted or the submission type. And then, for example, if something is late or if something is missing, I think I excluded the missing assignment, but it'll also have a tag for that. So they see that stuff. And then the things like the resubmissions and the drop stuff, that's a little bit more difficult. Resubmissions is on the student end. They've already resubmitted it to you. That's just a tag for you. But then something that's dropped, well, for example, can you actually identify which is dropped in here on the student end?
Oh, like because you had a drop lowest score policy set. No, I don't think I know which one was dropped.
Neither do I. I can't perceive it with my eye. But what it does is it grays it out slightly, is what it's supposed to do, supposedly.
It's possible that it may not have dropped anything yet, because like if it's in a group where you don't have, if your rule can't be applied.
Let's do this. Let's put a 0 in, because weekly discussion should be the one that's dropped.
Oh, you were acting as Sketch, though. That's Sketch doesn't have anything dropped. Yeah.
See, this is just because. There we go. Now let's go back.
Now Sketch has a drop grade, I think.
I like to bring a little bit of chaos to any experience you're signed up with me for. Okay. Sketch should have a drop grade. Can you tell which one is dropped?
No, I can see it. He just got a 0 on assignment 2, and then that's a new grade because it has a little blue box on it.
So that should be
But it's not
the dropped grade. But I don't know if you can tell, it is like just ever so slightly grayer than everything else.
I can't tell.
Exactly. I can tell on my computer, but I cannot tell on here. So
Interesting.
there is a thing.
But I
in
can see in his
Canvas.
assignments, in Skitch's assignments, he's got 100%, even
100%.
though he has a 0. So that is,
A weird thing that I found while I was working on this,
Yeah.
and I'll just to confirm I'm not crazy.
Oh,
Caleb,
okay,
please look
yep.
at my screen.
on
Okay,
your laptop, it is just ever so slightly lighter.
not trying to gaslight you. Just it is just a weird thing that you will notice. So
Interesting.
if you have things like, well, if you have things like dropped grades, there needs to be another layer of
You're gonna have to
communication
explain it
around
to your
it.
students.
Of course, it's got to be in the syllabus, but it's also got to be something that you communicate to them.
Maybe
know,
in a weekly announcement.
Or midterms, like, hey,
Yeah.
these are the grades that you've got dropped, maybe you've got some sort of resubmission policy if they want to boost their grade, that can all go hand in hand. Just something to think about.
So your thesis statement for communicating through the gradebook is sometimes you're gonna have to communicate in addition to the gradebook.
Which is a beautiful segue to our final tool, which I think is the most useful, at least for these kind of things, is the Message Students Who tool, which is in a couple of different places in Canvas, but in the gradebook, it specifically acts as a way to send inbox messages to students that meet certain criteria on an assignment level and on a total grade level. So, for example, if I jump over to, let me make sure I choose an assignment that, let's do this, post grades, I think this is the one. Because again, I have 2 assignments that have resubmissions, this is the one I want. Post grades, You got this, Canvas, I believe in you. It worked. Positive reinforcement. So in any assignment, I can come over to Message Students Who, just using the little kebab menu options button, however you want to describe it. And once I do that, it opens up a new window that allows me to, as it says, compose a message. So for this example, I can compose a message to students that have not yet submitted. This does not have to be after a due date. This can be before a due date. Hey, on Friday, on Friday, we've got a discussion post that you have to complete. Just know, I noticed that you didn't complete it yet, however you want to put that language, but you can remind them of things using this tool. I can click into this drop down and I see I have a lot of other options. For example, if somebody has submitted something, whether it's been graded or not graded, I can also send a message. So, hey, I am in the process of grading submissions. Just know I'll have those done by tomorrow. Or, for the love of God, stop messaging me. I will get the grades done soon. However you prefer to create student first language.
Okay.
Now, I can also come down, have not been graded. That's its own option, slightly different than
Because have not been graded will probably include both missing students and students who have submitted but you haven't graded yet.
potentially, yes. I believe so. That's where things get a little dicey, but yes. Scored more than a certain value, say if you have a non-traditional grading scheme that has kind of values associated with certain things like met, not yet met, incomplete, or some layer like that. This could be a way that you could send to certain groups in those categories. Hey, things are incomplete. You just need to resubmit and I'll regrade, assuming it follows whatever timeline you've got set. I can come down to scored less than. It's kind of similar process. I would urge caution. Please don't send messages pointed at certain groups of students to basically rag on them for certain grades. This is more for communicating something they can do with that grade. Maybe, hey, I noticed that on this last assignment, we didn't do so great. That's okay. I put some feedback in there so you can improve on your next assignment.
Or
Please take
maybe
a look at it. Let me know
if you
if you have
allow
questions.
multiple attempts on a submission on an assignment, you could say,
Absolutely.
you did not earn a passing grade on this yet, but you still have time to resubmit a second revision or something like that.
And you're layering like an action with it. It's not to, hey, this thing happened. It's there's some information I want you to know, and now here's what you can do with it. I think that makes this a much more useful tool and hopefully will boost engagement with students. So their engagement with whatever you're telling them. And then if you do have an assignment that you've reassigned, slightly different than they've submitted a new submission, but actively reassigned, you can then also communicate to them, hey, I have reassigned this thing to you, because sometimes students might not be aware of that process. process.
That's
You'll
probably
see it new on the calendar, for example.
That's probably a good idea if you do a lot of assign for resubmission functions, which I think is a wonderful function. I think there's a lot of value in having students receive feedback and then revise work. But like you said, if they don't realize you're doing that, they may miss that opportunity. So this is probably a good practice for a lot of students.
I think whatever we can do to hedge our bets on that. And just something to note is when this composes a message, it's going to be like a blind carbon copy email.
So they don't see who else is receiving it.
But that also means don't put any like specific information.
Don't say,
Unless...
hey, Nick, Caleb, and Cassie, you all failed this assignment.
Exactly. Unless you are actively going through and removing other students, which you can do by basically seeing a list of all the recipients over here on the right, and you can remove somebody or add them, and you'll have kind of a list of students that fall into that category. So I could, if I wanted to, go through and go, okay,
messages.
Skitch is the only one I want to talk to, XXXXX. That's a very convoluted way to do it. I would say this is more for that kind of bulk in messages to kind of save you time. If you want to do personalized messages, there's probably better ways to do that. But this can also give you a list of those students to send those if that's helpful, especially for like, certain categories that are not easily visually seen in the gradebook. So something to think about. But this can happen at the assignment level, but it also can happen over at our total grade, which is a little bit simpler. But if I come to message students who for this area, I have the ability to compose a message for individuals that have a total grade higher than a certain value or lower than a certain value. Again, if you have a GPA equivalent, that might be something to indicate to students, hey, your current percentage in this class is not a passing grade based off of syllabus, whatever information. Here's some things you can do to improve that grade.
Might be good for like a midterm check-in.
There might be all sorts of reasons. And again, if you have a non-traditional grading style, like communication is paramount, as it is with any grading scheme or way that you're running your course. But with those, it's sometimes helpful because they don't have the experience with your specific alternative grading system. So you can kind of communicate, hey, this is what this grade currently means. It's midterms. Just want you to know how this, maybe it's a labor-based or something like that, where there's a certain amount of stuff they got to do still, you can kind of dictate that off here. So with that, we've talked about a number of different things that kind of show up in here. Some of it a little bit more explanatory than others. Kind of the last thing is something that I think really depends on how you've got your course set up, but it's just a simple thing. Like by default, the total grade shows up as a percentage. If you want, you can just very quickly display it as points for students, and this will update on their end as well. So instead of seeing a percentage, they see a point value. Just kind of a simple thing, but again, it could better align with how your course is designed. Say it's a course that the grade is additive, so you start at 0 and you work your way up. Seeing a percentage would probably not be conducive to your goals. In this case, you can change the points, or maybe it's just a lot easier for a student to calculate their GPA based off points or something. Like there's so many different things that might happen here. But the idea is whatever you're communicating in here, you have the ability to at least show a lot of the picture.
See what that looks like from the student viewpoint just for a second, because I didn't realize that when you do that, it also changes the student.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll jump back, and as Sketch, as I kind of do this, and we see that total grade is now set as a value. They'll still get their percentage down here, but then again, the total, again, this will be by assignment group. But then they'll have that total grade instead being the kind of, I don't know, most important value. I don't know how to dictate that better, but when you're doing anything in here, I think the thing is like, there's a lot of different ways to manage this experience for students. Canvas has a certain number of things that it, I guess, will organically try to communicate, but using the message students who, or some other communication format, style, whatever vehicle, that's probably going to be what gives you the most bang for your buck. It's filling those gaps, making students feel comfortable with what they're seeing, because sometimes it doesn't actually dictate what's happening in the course. So with that, we've quickly gone through a number of different ways you can communicate in Gradebook, a couple different ways you can shoot yourself in the foot. But with all of that, we'll stick on for any questions as normal. And then I think next week we're going to be talking about how you, how you format your gradebook for your own success. So the ways you can kind of change settings around to make you happy.
Correct.
Cassie could have put that way better than I could have.
Tom's giving thumbs up fingers.
All right, I'll take
do we
it.
have anything in the chat?
We have cool, that's newish, but I talked so fast that I don't remember what that was.
I was just talking about the message students who on the total column.
Yes, that would have been, is that the update in the summer?
Pretty recent.
I think it was even after that.
Which one?
Anyway, yes.
All right.
I used that one myself during week 1 when I'm kind of reminding people, hey, you need to submit something or you get dropped.
Oh yeah,
Nice.
that's important.
Well, with that, you want to close the live stream and we'll keep questions going? If not,
Absolutely.
we'll talk to y'all later.
One of the cool things about